Okay, perfect. I am opening it now.
Yes, give me the cue.
It's starting now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to an additional security briefing of CAM. Buen día a toda la audiencia que nos acompaña de Latinoamérica. It's been 614 days since October 7th. 55 are still hostages in Gaza. Some of them are already marking their second birthday in captivity. And on the other hand, we are still trying to have some kind of routine in Israel. And for this matter, we have top-notch speaker today, Dr. Michael Barak and Dr. Olga Deutsch. And both of them will give us an overview about the situation from their end with their expertise. So I'll go directly to Dr. Barak. Dr. Barak is a senior researcher of the International Institution for Counter-Terrorism, ICT, and a lecturer at the School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy of Reichman University, among other things. And I think that his expertise as an expert in global jihad is very relevant for our briefing today. So welcome, Dr. Barak. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the invitations and thanks for the guests. So I will begin with the Gaza and the West Bank security situation, and then I will refer to Hamas efforts to build and to rehabilitate its strongholds in Lebanon, in Turkey, and also in Syria. So first of all, as we know, in the Gaza strips, there is a guerrilla warfare that Hamas has been conducting against Israeli forces, like planting explosive devices. Hamas is also trying to recruit young people to his ranks, and he also conducting a psychological warfare, particularly in the issue of the abducted Israelis, in order and also to portray a victory image. And of course, all the psychological warfare that concerns the abducted Israelis is aims to create a rift inside the Israeli society and to create debates among the Israeli society if it's wise to continue with the war in Gaza or not. Also, Hamas members wrote a lot of on that issue even before 7th of October, that in order to break and to destroy the Israeli society, Hamas needs to abduct Israeli civilians or Israeli soldiers. Hamas is also trying to mobilize, this is extremely important, to mobilize the Palestinians in the West Bank. We see it in social media networks, how Hamas is using, recruiting narratives, disseminating narratives against Israel, disseminating conspiracy theories that Israel is having a genocide in Gaza and that is interested to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is also a very important field about the cognitive warfare that Hamas has been conducting. Another thing is that Hamas has been looting the humanitarian aid that is being sent to Gaza. Israel, of course, is trying to deal with that. Also, there is an American firm that is also trying to deal with that. And very recently, today, actually, the Israel Hayom, leading Israeli newspapers in Israel, published exposed that there was a coordination between Hamas to the UN in smuggling cigarettes, food, and other products to Gaza, and they are being stored in Hamas members' storage. And this is I think, is something that we should bear in mind about this cooperation. And Hamas also has been doing a demonization to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF, claiming that, for example, that Israel is using this platform, this organization, to have a massacre in Palestinians to ask food. Of course, this is part of the psychological warfare of Hamas. Now, in order to cope with that, in the last 2 months, Israel managed to cultivate ties with the clan of Abu Shabab. Abu Shabab is a clan in east of Rafah in Gaza Strip, and those members, Palestinians clan who belongs to the Tarabin tribe, they are actually the first Palestinian group that is fighting also against Hamas, and is also declared that it managed to establish a clean territory from Hamas, that this territory is safe for any Palestinians who wants to find shelter from Hamas oppression, and that this territory is also safe to get a food supply. Again, Hamas is not happy from this development, and also claims that Abu Shabab clan, these Palestinians, actually they are a gang, they are criminals who cooperate with the United Arab Emirates, been funded by the UAE, and that this clan and that this group of Abu Shabab is also a product or collaborator of the Shin Bet, the Israeli Shin Bet, that is being added also by the Palestinian Authority. Also, we should remember that Israel was trying to recruit or to cultivate ties with some Palestinian clans in Gaza, and the result was that Hamas executed some of the leaders of those Palestinian clans. So those Palestinian clans were afraid to cooperate with Israel or other factors against Hamas. But right now, we see that this is the first. I don't know if maybe it's optimist sign if that this Abu Shabab clan is fighting against Hamas. But again, it's too early to determine if this will be a success. I don't think it will survive for a long term, because Hamas is also is trying to target, to assassinate some of these members of Abu Shabab clan, and also the Tarabin, the big tribe which Abu Shabab belongs to. The Tarabin tribe say that he doesn't recognize Abu Shabab clan, and it's not representing the tribe. So I think also another thing that was less paid attention in the media is that Israel managed also to target Al-Qaeda members inside Gaza Strip. In Gaza Strips, there are not only Hamas members and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad or PFLP, there are also Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but particularly Al-Qaeda members, Al-Qaeda supporters. And in the 1st of June, this month, Israel managed to target one of the prominent leaders of Salafi Jihadi Al-Qaeda supporter, Nail Ben Ghazi, who has been also cultivated ties during the last decade with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and with the Taliban in Afghanistan. He also interviewed the Al-Qaeda members and also wrote until his death, until he died, was targeted in the 1st of June. In June, he was publishing articles in the official magazine of the Taliban, which is called Sumud. And this is something that we have to bear in mind, that the contacts between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to some Palestinians who are identified with the global jihad ideas inside Gaza Strips. Now I'm moving to the West Bank. So again, the West Bank, this is actually, according to Hamas and also to Iran, this is the most important battlefield against Israel. And Ali Khamenei, the leader of Iran, also declared many times that Gaza is the base of conducting jihad against Israel, but in order to defeat Israel, the West Bank should be the main platform in order to conduct terrorist attacks against Israeli cities. And this is something that we continue in every declaration, in many declarations, and also in the propaganda of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We see how the West Bank is extremely important. And we have also Hamas members in Turkey and Lebanon that are trying to inflame and try to escalate the security situation in the West Bank. So actually, if we look in the north of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, we see that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is the one that is trying to cultivate or to escalate the security situation in the north of in the West Bank, particularly in Tulkarem, Tubas, Jenin, and Nablus. He managed, even before 7th of October, he managed to establish 8 battalions. It call it Katiba. Katiba is like it's battalion, but actually, if we look on the ground, this is a small group of fighters, terrorists that were trying to challenge the authority of Israel and to also to challenge the authority of the Palestinian Authority. Now, there are also young people inside the West Bank that are not necessarily identified with Hamas or the PIJ, and they are they are disappointed from the Palestinian Authority. They think that the Palestinian Authority is corrupted. They are disappointed from the security cooperation between Israel to the Palestinian Authority, and they also think that this is a damage or for their pride, honor. So they want to like to defend all their honor, and that's why they managed to organize independent cells that are trying to fight against Israeli forces. But actually, those independent cells are been also been equipped by weapon thanks to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad identified these phenomena, and this is the one that also supply weapon to these young people. It's also important to bear in mind another Palestinian terrorist organization, the PFLP, the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Since 2018, there is a huge rift between this organization to the Fatah and the Abu Mazen, the Palestinian Authority. And in 7th of October, the PFLP joined to the massacre of 7th of October in Gaza. And in the West Bank, we see that the PFLP is also involved in trying to escalate the security situation inside the West Bank. For example, in February 2025, this year, Jamil Mazar, the deputy of the leader of the PFLP, declared that the Palestinians should fight against the alliance between the imperialist United States, America, and against the Zionist entity. And they will do that until United States will lose its hegemony in the Middle East, and until the destruction of the state of Israel. And they also have been criticizing the Palestinian Authority for cooperating with Israel in the security measures that were taken against the Mukawama, the resistance, as they call it, against the terrorist cells inside the West Bank. Now, Hamas is also found in the West Bank and is trying to empower itself. We have to remember that because of the deal between Israel to Hamas to liberate the Israeli hostages, many Palestinians from the Israeli jail were released. And most of them are living in the West Bank. And right now, after the deal, they got back to their home in the West Bank. They came back with a motivation to get back to terrorist actions against Israel. They have military knowledge. They have connections. So this is also a multi-power. This can empower the power of Hamas in the West Bank, and this is something that the Palestinian Authority is also very concerned. As I mentioned, Iran is also playing a major role in trying to escalate the security situation in the West Bank. We know that Iran lost its power in Syria after the fall of Bashar al-Assad regime, and also lost some of the power in Lebanon because of Hezbollah was struck by Israel. But still, Iran is trying to rehabilitate, of course, the power of Hezbollah, but also the power of Hamas, particularly in the West Bank. And and how they are doing that, although the Muhammad al-Julani that now is found in power in Syria, there are still in Syria smuggling routes, smuggling weapons and drugs from Syria to Jordan and from Jordan to the West Bank. Now, there are some pro-Iranian activists, gangs, criminals, and also some Shia Iranian supporters in Syria that are that are trying to use Syria to smuggle weapons to the Jordan and from Jordan to the West Bank in order, again, to equip the Palestinians with weapons and to challenge the security situation in the West Bank. Of course, as I mentioned, Ali Khamenei is extremely interested to inflame, to torch the security situation in the West Bank. So there is also a concern that if there will be escalation with Iran, some of the pro-Iranian Shia organizations, factions in Iraq can maybe penetrate the border with Jordan and can challenge the authority of the Jordanian king. Very recently, we heard about the Jordanian kingdom success to expose a terrorist cell that was ran by Muslim Brotherhood members that had connections to pro-Iranian Shia factions. In other words, what I'm trying to say that there is an attempt by Iran and its pro-Iranian factions to exploit the alliance between the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan to Iran in order to smuggle weapons to Jordan and to use it or against Israel and also recently against the Jordanian kingdom. Now, what about Lebanon? So in Lebanon, it's very important. There are still there is a Hamas. We can find many Hamas members in Lebanon. Before 7th of October, there were attempts by Hamas, successful attempts by Hamas to overtake or to increase the influence of Hamas on the Palestinian refugee camps, and especially in El Khilwa camp and others. And actually, Hezbollah was the one that enabled and assisted to Hamas to take over some of those Palestinian refugee camps. We saw that after 7th of October, there were attempts by Hamas to launch missiles from the south of Lebanon to Israel. And Hamas, it's extremely important for Hamas to exploit the human sources and the people, the Palestinians who live in the refugee camps in Lebanon. The Hamas is interested to recruit them for their military actions, and also Hamas has been busy or doing indoctrinations inside these refugee camps. Now, this is extremely important because although the Hezbollah was striked and the Hamas also in some aspect was also struck by the IDF, Hamas still has a big influence inside these refugee camps. We know that the Lebanese regime is interested, or at least he declared that he is interested also to disarm some of these refugee camps. In these refugee camps, we can find Palestinians, pro-Hamas Palestinians, that are have a lot of weapons. Just an example, just if I can mention that Hamas, together with the PIG and the PFLP and the Hezbollah, they managed to establish a joint warfare room. This is a warfare room. The main goal was to coordinate military actions and terrorist actions against Israel. And this joint warfare is still active. And the base, of course, is in Beirut. Now, Hamas is not only active also in Lebanon, it is also active in Turkey. Unfortunately, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is giving shelter to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood network. And we have to remember that Hamas is the official Palestinian a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, although in 2017, Hamas declared that it was not anymore the official branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. But again, Hamas is deeply connected to the Muslim Brotherhood movement, and he has connections with it if it's in Qatar, if it's in Turkey, and also in Lebanon with Jamaah Islamiyah, Zair Jabarin was the deputy of Salah el-Aruri, one of the prominent members of Hamas that was trying to mobilize the Palestinian in the West Bank and to escalate the security situation in the West Bank against Israel. And so Zair Jabarin we can find him in Turkey together with our other Hamas members who have been using also the Muslim Brotherhood network in Turkey and also, by the way, West Europe, to fund and send money to Hamas. We are concerned about Iran. I'm also concerned about Iran, but I'm more concerned about Turkey because we see that Hamas over there is become only stronger and stronger and have been able to develop contacts with different radical groups like Milli Gurush in Turkey, in Germany, and the Muslim Brotherhood in India. I think that in the midterm or the long run, Israel will have to face this problematic situation about the consolidation power of Hamas in Turkey, we have to remember that in Syria we still have a regime that is pro-Turkish. Although there are some peaceful messages by Muhammad al-Julani, and I'm optimistic by that, we have to remember that the Turkish the Turkish influence is very strong in Syria, and there are also Muslim Brotherhood and also, by the way, Hamas members in Syria. So this is something that Israel should bear in mind, and also the international community should monitor and follow after the developments in Syria to see that Hamas is not using Syria as a platform to build these strongholds and to challenge the Israeli security in the near future. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barak. It was enlightening, a lot of information there. We are receiving some questions from the people that are this briefing, and a lot of are concerned about the direct involvement of Iran. And we know that tomorrow President Trump said that it will be a decisive day, 1 month from the starting of the negotiations. And before getting to the threat of Turkey, we are all concerned about Iran and this process of negotiation. Maybe you can elaborate about it and briefly, so people understand a bit more about the situation.
About Iran and Hamas?
About Iran and the negotiations with the United States and possible operational force against Iran.
Okay, I depend on open sources. I don't have much information, but what I can say is that in Tehran there are Hamas representatives. Some of the political bureau of Hamas is sitting in Tehran, and together they are trying also to they are sending messages to their followers in Gaza strips. But it's again after 7th of October and after most of the leadership of Hamas in Gaza Strip that was targeted. We don't have Yahya Sinwar, we don't have Muhammad Sinwar. Actually, the power of the external leadership of Hamas has become stronger. So if, for example, if I will mention Khaled Mashal, a prominent leader of Hamas, who is sitting in Qatar, he declared that Hamas was ready to disarm himself and to get outside from Gaza Strip, etc., etc. So the leadership of Hamas in Gaza Strip declared that Khaled Mashal was not representing the Hamas leadership. In other words, there is let's say, some tension between the external leadership that is sitting in Tehran or in Turkey or in Qatar to the leadership. I don't know who is the leader anymore, but in Gaza Strip, there is a kind of messages from the external leadership of Hamas to the Gaza Strip, but the leaders in Gaza Strip, some of them don't like the peaceful, I don't know if it's peaceful, but the messages or the instructions from the external leaderships of Hamas. This is something, again, there is a tension, and I don't have much information about how the decision making is being conducted among inside Hamas.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Barak, for all this information. I think that it's important also to understand, that Israel is confronting a lot of threat in this moment, and we should always remember, the octopus that today is financing most of those organizations that you were mentioning, and also other threat that we have in the region. So thank you very much for your words today, and hopefully to see you in next security briefing. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And now I'm welcoming Olga Deutsch. It's an honor to have you here, Vice President of NGO Monitoring. Olga is a global expert with extensive expertise in international politics and Europe-Israel relations, and it will be interesting to hear from your point of view of NGO Monitor about the involvement of international organization in the conflict in the Middle East, and to see your analysis about the next steps and next actions that those organizations will lead at the next weeks and months. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shay, and thank you for having me and for inviting me, and thank you to everyone who joined this briefing, and to Combat Antisemitism Movement for organizing such insightful opportunities to exchange. The briefing that was offered by Dr. Barak was truly enlightening, and I was particularly happy that it covered not only the physical war and the physical threats, but also the psychological and cognitive warfare, because these are oftentimes undermined and overlooked in how important they are in complementing what Palestinian terror organizations do. I would like to extend a little bit further on that, actually, and talk about a complementary political warfare that Palestinian terror groups wage on the international scene, and connect it actually to the global surge in anti-Semitism. These two topics are not necessarily something that people directly connect to each other, but I will show you through practical examples how they actually intimately intertwine. We have a situation in which Palestinian terror organizations, and Hamas is the most prominent one, but Dr. Barak also mentioned the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is actually the leading force in political warfare against Israel and the global Jewish community in the past 30 years, since the signing of the Oslo Accords. Because we have a very unique situation in which, as we know, in the Palestinian Authority, all these terror groups are political parties, then they have military wings, but they also have civil society wings and branches that allow them to both raise funds internationally, but also wage political warfare. This complementary political warfare is geared to do two things. Number one, its goal is to normalize and oftentimes even romanticize Hamas, PFLP, and other Palestinian terror organizations. And this is how we find ourselves in a situation that the mere conversation as to whether Hamas is a terrorist organization designated as such by US, EU, Israel, obviously Canada, and so on. And this is after October the 7th, when there's abundance of evidence of the horrific things that they have perpetrated, or can they be called militants? And oftentimes they are even being romanticized, and this is allowed by a political campaign that is being waged around the world. But an even more damaging or damning part of the goal of this political warfare is to weaken the international legitimacy of Israel's right to defend itself, including what the IDF is waging. All Palestinian terror organizations have charities that are linked to them, and they operate globally. Their goal is to raise funds, and any expert on the counter will tell you that charities are the most fragile structures and the easiest ones to abuse, because they're not really subject to stringent legislative requirements or have demands for very tight accountability in any country. But very uniquely for the Palestinian cause, they also have a very elaborative network of non-governmental organizations that advocate and lobby for the Palestinian cause globally. They resume to economical pressure, they resume to lawfare, which is a systematic effort to abuse legal systems around the world. They resort to trying to influence and abuse the media structures, and brilliantly, if I may say, they weaponize what we colloquially call as the human rights space, because all of this is done in the guise or in the name of promoting and defending human rights. Most of these organizations also define themselves as human rights groups. They partner with other global human rights organizations, and we find ourselves in a situation where there is confluence and collaboration between Palestinian so-called human rights organizations and global names like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and Oxfam. I will give you now a few examples of how this actually is done in practice. So only a month ago, there was a case in London where Al-Haq, the biggest Palestinian PFLP-affiliated so-called human rights non-governmental organization, together with Amnesty International and Oxfam, filed a lawsuit against the British government, trying to pressure them to not supply US F-35 components to Israel that are basically just physically stored in British military warehouses. A similar attempt was done in the Netherlands a year ago, and throughout the last previous 12 months in Denmark, in Germany, and a few other countries. So there is an ongoing lawfare campaign that is trying actually to impose an arms embargo on Israel, which would directly undermine Israel's ability to defend itself and IDF's ability to run the war. In parallel to that, you have ongoing attempts by the similar organizations to influence the decisions of the United Nations, to pass resolutions at the United Nations Human Rights Council, which are then referenced in submissions that are filed to the International Criminal Court in The Hague and International Court of Justice. To put this in an even broader context, when South Africa files a lawsuit, a claim against Israel, accusing it of genocide, it is just an extension of a campaign that was born on October 8th, spearheaded by Palestinian so-called human rights organizations that accused Israel of genocide, afterwards starvation, apartheid, and so on. When we analyzed the South African claim in the International Court of Justice, we saw that 22 footnotes led to Palestinian NGO sources, which are presented to the court as objective sources of facts of how Israel and IDF systematically violate international law and human rights. Obviously, these groups are neither objective nor true human rights groups. We can show, based on open source information, that they're clearly affiliated to PFLP and actually have a goal to to spread the PFLP and Hamas's political sphere of influence globally to complement the physical war. The co-authors of the South African claim in The Hague were actually a former Al-Haq employee and a former Human Rights Watch employee, which shows that there is a methodology and a network behind these attempts. We will see many of the same actors trying to influence bills and resolutions on the Hill in DC and in the parliaments around the world. If we zoom in what has been happening since October the 7th globally and in the unprecedented surge in anti-Semitic attacks around the world, we can also see that, for example, in the context of the encampments on North American campuses and the violence that erupted there, it was pretty much the same non-governmental organizations, all defining themselves as human rights groups, that were mobilizing the streets and the campuses and collaborating in a very coordinated effort with other groups, spreading the same narratives, same messages, talking about global intifada, talking about globalizing intifada, calling for violence. And much like Dr. Barak spoke about an orchestrated effort to destroy and be disruptive when it comes to the Israeli society from within as part of the cognitive warfare, there is an ongoing attempt and campaign to do the similar thing within the global Jewish community to spread fear and fear-mongering. There are several types of Palestinian organizations doing that. So you have the grassroots guerrilla organizations like a global network, Samidun, which is affiliated to PFLP. That is one of the leading forces behind the American campuses, violence on North American, both Canadian and US campuses, and they tend to be much more violent. Just last week, they staged a public demonstration in Belgium, in Brussels, where Samidun activists actually rehashed what happened on October the 7th, mimicking the taking of hostages with guns and very violent music on the streets of Belgium. What very few people know is that they're a global network. So they have 8 chapters, including one in Tehran, which confluence with the global network and the cooperation in the warfare room, right? Joint warfare room, where they coordinate their political activities as well. And the international community and the authorities don't always know of their global activities. I'll give you an example. When we briefed the German government in 2023, just before October the 7th, about Samidun, they thought that it's a group that only operates on soil of Germany. Although their leader, Khaled Barakat, was kicked out of Germany and his visa was not renewed, he then moved to Canada, where now we have a hotbed of Samidun activities. Luckily, they're being gradually outlawed. In the meantime, Germany, Netherlands, France outlawed their French affiliate, and US and Canada designated Samidun. The challenge is that they cooperate with a line of other organizations and affiliated groups. So it's not always easy and not enough to designate one such group. The authorities are gradually identifying the danger behind this. Actually, yesterday, the US Treasury designated 10 Hamas and PFLP fronts, 5 of which were charities. One of them, 4 affiliated to Hamas, and one in Italy, one in Turkey, and some in the rest of Europe. But one of them, Adamir, was actually a very well-known PFLP affiliated organization. And all were actually accused of both raising funds for Hamas and PFLP, but also spreading the political influence and lobbying and normalizing basically their radical agendas and narratives and in the Western world, in the democratic society. We see similar things even happening in economic and business circles, the ESG circles that touch on the investment patterns and how pension funds and investment companies choose to advise their clients where to invest their portfolios. These have been penetrated by the so-called Palestinian human rights organizations that are feeding rating companies with reports showing how companies doing business in Israel or with Israel systematically violate international law and human rights, and through so doing, lowering their ratings. And this is one of the strategic ways in which they try to harm or strengthen Hamas, because you cannot even measure how many investments never took place. So we're truly looking at a global political warfare, which is complementary to the physical one. I want to add an interesting element to this, which is the component of the humanitarian and development aid. We're right now looking into the reality and the global discussion of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And in that context, there is a global mobilization of aid that needs to be distributed in Gaza. What very few people know is that when we talk about humanitarian aid, we should not think only in terms of physical aid. Most people will have you believe that humanitarian aid comes in forms of flour, clothes, tents, medicine. Very few people know that approximately 1/3 of humanitarian aid is always earmarked for political advocacy projects. When the United Nations launched an emergency appeal for Gaza for the last quarter of 2023, which is basically the last 3 months after, like the 3 months following October the 7th, they wanted to raise $1.6 billion from the international community. The international community basically means the 30 developed DAC countries, according to OECD, which is US, Canada, EU, and the wealthier EU member states, Switzerland, a little bit of Japan, and Australia. This is when you hear international community, you should think in terms of of these 30 countries, and then the $1.6 billion gets it becomes even more contextualized. They stated that they will want to meet 3 objectives. The third one was political advocacy. When we dig into what that means and what these projects actually are, we find our way to the projects that are spearheaded by the same Palestinian so-called human rights organizations, whose projects evolve around lobbying the United Nations and the UN Commission of Inquiry, lobbying the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, the International Court of Justice, and lobbying the governments around the world, mobilizing the streets. And then we see how all these dots interconnect. The main organizations spearheading this campaign are Palestinian so-called human rights organizations. And I just want to share one last anecdote, basically, that will show you the profile of these groups. Way before October the 7th, in August 2019, there was a terror attack that took place on the outskirts of Jerusalem, in which a 17-year-old Rina Shnerb, Israeli girl, was brutally murdered through an explosive. A couple of months later, Israeli forces and Israeli media, security forces through Israeli media, exposed that it was a 50-people PFLP terror cell that was responsible for this terror attack. When we analyzed the names of these 50 people, we found out that 9 of them were senior employees of 6 Palestinian so-called human rights organizations, who all at that moment enjoyed generous support, financial, but not only, through the EU and other EU member states official development cooperation aid programs. Now, the officials of these non-governmental organizations didn't play a marginal role in the terror attack. One of them was accused and charged for detonating the explosive, the other one for mobilizing the entire terror cell. And most of them, they were consequently designated by Israel as PFLP terror fronts. But the terror attack was actually an anomaly. It was an exception to the rule. Most of their activities evolve around spreading the political sphere of influence of PFLP and other Palestinian terror groups. And in so doing, they allow and normalize Palestinian terror and normalize it in the international political sphere. And in a way, what happened after October the 7th assists us or help us to have an informed discussion about this, because it put it to the forefront. Before October the 7th, most of these things were reserved for the expert discussions among security and counter-terror experts. But I believe that a very welcome development of a horrific massacre that happened and the war that followed on October the 7th is that this is now a discussion that is being led in a broader context in the public sphere. And it is crucial to understand how terror groups today wage wars, because not all fronts are physical fronts, and most of them are actually political and spreading the sphere of influence. I'll stop here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Olga. It was really enlightening, and to see also this angle that we sometimes forget, and it's very, very important in the challenges we are facing today. I just have a question that, and maybe let's try to be brief because we have to close this briefing. We see like organization like HRF, the targeting soldiers, Israeli soldiers that are in vacations worldwide, and we all aware about SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, and how they are feeding anti-Semitism in America and Europe, and unfortunately here also in our region, Latin America. Do you think, according to your monitoring, this will be a phenomenon that will become maybe stronger, or it's already reduced or lose some of its strong activities?
Well, this is a phenomenon that existed before October the 7th as well, and was just catapulted and grew up exponentially after October the 7th. I'm very happy that you mentioned, I didn't go into specific organizations because I wanted to, limit my remarks to 10, 15 minutes, but I'm very happy that you bring up these organizations because they are perfect examples to how this global campaign works. The Hin Rajab Foundation that you mentioned, right, that is based in Belgium, is allegedly a front of Al-Haq, of a Palestinian organization that I mentioned earlier, and they're just a much more militant or much more aggressive version of it. So one will abuse the legal structures and the UN and the international structures and apply lawfare. The other one goes after our soldiers. Both don't necessarily have as a goal to have any of the Israelis truly arrested, but their goal is the disruptive politics and imagery of it, right? Sparking a global conversation about it and diluting the legitimacy of what the IDF and the Israel is doing, the legitimacy of the mere fact that we have a state and that we have a right to defend ourselves, something that is not being put under the question when it comes to any other country. Now, in parallel to that, you have SJP with their astonishing 310 chapters around US, which launched a global campaign on October the 8th, meaning they were already prepared, mobilized, and ready to launch a campaign across the US the day after October the 7th, and had a network in place. We mapped out the organizations last year that were behind the US campus violence, and we mapped at least 157 groups. But more interestingly, we could show over 3,000 connections between them, pointing to the fact that there was nothing organic or spontaneous about it. They were very structured because some of these groups worked as lobby organizations, some as research groups, feeding the others with messaging, reports, facts and figures, talking points. Some, like SJP, worked as grassroots, boots on the ground, whose goal was to mobilize the streets and the campuses, and some worked as fiscal sponsors. When you analyze, you see that most of these groups lead to the same 5 or 6 or 7 fiscal sponsors, which also shows that it's part of the part of the same campaign. All of them worked with Samidun, which is a PFLP affiliated organization, and they echo the same, sometimes blatant Hamas messages, right? No, romanticizing them and echoing them. And then it turns into a global campaign. So Samidun in Germany and in Belgium and France would run major demonstrations on the streets. In the US and Canada, they were mainly focused on campuses. But because in Europe, the campus structure works differently, right? There is much less of a campus life, but it is part of a global campaign. I do not think that we will be seeing less of this. I think that they will continue to escalate the conversation and abuse the situation. You can almost show the gradual escalation of their discourse, right? After October the 7th, none of the groups condemned October the 7th. Most of them denied that any of the atrocities happened, and some even accused Israel of making this up in order to find legitimacy to invade Gaza. But on the backdrop of that, they immediately went on a campaign to terrorize the global Jewish communities and spread fear, right? Which is ultimately anti-Semitic, because they're attacking local Jewish communities around the world for something that Israel is doing. All the surveys around the world show very clearly that not only was there an incredible surge in anti-Semitism, the report issued by the Israeli government earlier this year speaks about 340% rise in anti-Semitism. But a much more interesting piece of information and statistics is that they say that 70% of anti-Semitic incidents is Israel related, which clearly shows that the two are interlinked, and that the anti-Semitic incidents are, amongst others, geared to amplify the campaign against Israel and to vilify basically anything that has to do with Israel and the war that is happening.
Wow. So thank you very much, Olga. I think, yeah, it's not very optimistic a scenario, but we have to know what we are dealing with, and of course, this angle is very, very important in our advocacy. So unfortunately, our time ends for today briefing. Thank you very much, Dr. Barak. Thank you very much, Olga. Good luck there in Los Angeles. And for our audience, thank you for being with us. We will continue sharing the information. If you have any questions to our speakers, please send us by mail, and we will try to address it to the speakers. And remember that we still have 55 hostages in Gaza, 614 days from October 7th. This is even longer than the independence days of the independent war of Israel. So let's all be with the families and, of course, claim for their liberty. So thank you very much for the speaker. Thank you very much for you, and see you at the next security briefing. Shalom.
Thank you.